additional incremental traffic proportional share of the signal light to the applicant. And so should you approve this, staff has recommended a condition of approval, it's number 7, that would include us having them pay 4% of the costs of erecting the signal light at that intersection, should this be approved. Because that's the incremental amount of traffic that this rezone would result, should you approve it for this location. Let's see. The other hoop that we needed to jump through, and I think was, and according to staff, has been satisfactorily done, is the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development wanted additional information to convince them that we were not unduly lessening our employment lands. And so there's quite a bit of information in the staff report and indication that staff performed a update of a comprehensive plan dealing with industrial land supply. And that study convinced the State Department, and it helped reassure staff that we do have an adequate supply of industrial land, even if this parcel were rezoned to residential, to serve our needs for the next 20 years. And that's the general criteria that the state looks at. In an ideal situation, they were asking us to do a full economic opportunity analysis study. That's something that communities do maybe once every 10 years at considerable cost and expense. The little study that I want to give some credit to Matilda in working on updating a comprehensive plan portion that talks about that land needs for industrial and employment needs was satisfactorily accepted, and they felt should be, well, it convinced them that we're well supplied in industrial land at this time. So that those two items were very important, and the state also asked for a more clear addressing of the statewide planning goals. But the primary reason was for Goal 2, which talks about economic development and making sure that in your mind, with this request, that we're not lessening our employment opportunities, and that we're balancing all of the statewide planning goals, which also include housing opportunities and supplying those needs for the community as a whole. And that's where a very important consideration came forth as we worked through this with the applicant, in that at this point in time, there is a lot of evidence, and it's in the record, that Canby is in great need of additional multifamily housing for the community. And that's where the applicant came from to begin with, is not only did they see a market opportunity for this piece of property, they also saw a niche within the community, partly supported in the record by a recent study that your city staff had done, indicating that currently there's no openings in our apartment units. Nobody even has to advertise when there is one. By word of mouth, they're filled the next day. Local residents don't have an opportunity to, when they graduate, to stay in Canby to live if they're not ready to purchase a home. And so there is definitely a need. So the question, of course, is this the right location or not? At the Planning Commission meeting, in the staff report that we provided to you, just as a quick summary, we probably said more than we needed to in the report, but you do have the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting as well that I think we sent out to you separately when those were done. But basically indicated that there were some concerns from the area industrial business owners. We have a couple of those. The McCormicks are in the audience tonight. They were at the Planning Commission meeting. They've actually come out in support of this application when they felt like the conditions of approval that were recommended by staff really addressed their concerns. So that was the other point I wanted to get across, is if you move towards approving this request, we would direct you back to the original conditions of rezone that staff had recommended, and don't forget those, and consider those as to whether you think those would be suitable to tie with an approval of this. And if you'd like, I can go through those really quickly. We did have, besides that, public input from the McCormicks. I think there was a letter in your packet from Pioneer Pump actually taking a stance against, and they were kind of somewhat aligned to what the Planning Commission ended up voting on this issue, where they had a concern about the eventual compatibility between the residential and the commercial. The Planning Commission had a 3-to-1 vote to deny this request. The one vote in favor recognized that residents that might eventually move into an apartment complex in this location would be well aware that they're moving in to a surrounding industrial site. It's not like it's growing up around them. It's already there. And emphasized the fact that this location is on the edge of the industrial park. It's utilizing a very unusually shaped industrial property that has very little frontage on the primary street, Sequoia Parkway. And that has lent some difficulty, apparently, to the applicant in trying to market this property. And we're on the edge with seeing Fred Meyer adjacent. Wilco is not necessarily an industrial type use. We're right next to Arneson Park, and so it's kind of a little corner that's not necessarily right in the middle of the industrial park. Another piece of information that was sent to you for the record by Kim and was forwarded because the applicant was going to give it to you otherwise, was a Wall Street Journal article that indicated that it's not unusual now for apartments to be built in industrial parks. That particular article that was submitted for the record when I read it, it was talking about pretty high-end parks with major 500, well, I'm not sure. They were large type parks, bigger than our own, and had high-end luxury type apartments going into industrial parks. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee also submitted a report, and what they were touting, and which is very legitimate because it's actually an ordinance requirement whenever possible and reasonable to tie to our pedestrian system in town. The logging road goes right by this property, and our trail that's in that. Unfortunately, the rail spur is between the trail and this property, and the owner, operator, or lessor, I don't know which it is, of that rail spur has already indicated that he considers it a liability if a crossing, whether it's vehicular or whether it's pedestrian, goes across that rail track. So that would mean building an overhead kind of connection or possibly a parallel connection down through the next property down to 4th Avenue and then over to the trail. And so that's something that could be worked on if this is approved and during a development application as to whether there's any way to actually make the connection to the trail or not. We would certainly want to do that if we could, but it may not be something that can be accomplished at this site. It was attempted when Fred Meyer Shopping Center went in. They were not successful. So I doubt that this apartment complex would be either. I did want you to be aware, I wasn't here at the time, but in 2008, there was another request for a comp plan amendment and rezone in the Pioneer Industrial Park, and that was led by Gordon Root to build a motel. I don't know what other commercial uses might have been associated with that. That never did go forward, and one of the reasons were it was going to add additional traffic to the intersection at Highway 99 and Sequoia, and ODOT thwarted that, and they never did successfully solve the problems that that rezoning was going to cause for traffic at that particular intersection. And so that never went through because of that. That just focuses back on the fact that that's why all this traffic study and was done on this one, to make sure that that kind of problem would not happen. And if it's approved with the change to the transportation system plan to add the signal light, everything should be fine traffic-wise. So just really quickly, if you'd like, I can just mention the 7 conditions of approval staff had in the original recommendation.
You do that, Brian, that'd be fine. Just so that you and the audience would know.
I'm going to find the easiest place where I had put those. I should have used stickies. Here they are. Right there. That's not them. Maybe I'll find them. Well, I got them over here. This will be my easiest place to find them. Okay, so one of the conditions, go directly to them.
And this is for the zoning change, correct?
Yeah, this would be with the zone change. And the reason for the conditions would be to help assure that when a subsequent development application comes forward, that we've put some outline on what our expectation is that goes actually above and beyond what our actual land development ordinance would demand of that particular project. And so that's why the conditions are indicated. And so the first condition is to require a 25-foot landscape buffer that would be adjacent to the commonly owned 5-acre tract that's going to retain the M2 zoning, and against the railroad spur, unless they're going to put their garage units in that area, or unless they're going to put their parking and drive in that area, to help give a greater separation from the rail line and a greater separation from that adjacent M2 zoning, to help increase that compatibility. And so by providing that buffer, there'd be a much greater chance that you could have adequate screening with proper vegetation in that 25-foot wide buffer. The applicant shall provide on condition 2 a specific heightened level of building construction standards to be utilized in conjunction To address the noise attenuation, we have in the record, Pioneer Pump tests their pumps not that far away from this site. That can be addressed adequately with triple pane windows and possibly increased insulation in the walls of a unit. It's been done in other instances where you're next to a freeway and those kind of things. And so there's a way to make a good living environment for someone in a residential situation that might be near known noise levels. And so we thought that was, and that's not something we could try to get during the development application, but could more readily assure if we make it a condition of the rezoning. The applicant shall record a deed restriction to allow the uses on the adjacent M2 zone property that they currently own. The applicant readily agreed to that because they plan to continue to own and develop that property, and they don't want to develop it with anything that would adversely impact their proposed apartment complex. And so by limiting to only those uses that are generally allowed in an M1 district and not those that could be possibly allowed in an M2, a heavy industrial zone district, we give a better chance of that compatibility for this unit if it should happen. The fourth condition was a deed restriction to prohibit any future comprehensive plan amendment or zoning map amendment to allow residential or commercial zone district on that remaining 5-acre tract. So basically, we don't want to see them expand this apartment complex any further. And the adjacent property owners, Trend Business Center, had voiced that at a neighborhood meeting and at the public hearing, that they felt that that was a condition that they wanted because they thought they needed this M1 type buffer between them and the apartment to help with that buffering in this location. Condition 5 was to limit the driveway accesses that would be allowed on this site to only 2, one for each of the legally tax lots that they own, and to conform with the 200, and otherwise conform with the 200-foot spacing standard along Sequoia, which no dimensions were provided at this point, so we don't know exactly what they were, but they had given us some conceptual plans of what might be done, and there were probably too many driveways that would to meet our standards, and so we felt like it was very important to let them know that everybody thinks we need to meet those driveway standards. They're on a curve on Sequoia. It's not a good place to have extra driveways, so we thought it'd be good to have that limitation. The other I mentioned before of having the applicant contribute 4% of the cost of the traffic signal and its associated improvements. And then the 7th was to memorialize the agreement that if you approve this rezone, that the city would then pursue a comprehensive, pursue a transportation plan amendment and add the signal light to our capital improvement list. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate that. Councilor Cohen.
I was going to ask, would you say that the current industrial park in total, isn't it about 300 acres?
It's 367, I believe.
Okay, and would you say it's about a third built out?
That's what I believe Renata has told me, approximately.
So the usable land for this is really less than about 3% of the total industrial parkland, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll go with your math.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Brian, so the transportation piece, 160 apartments is going to generate how much in, where'd my question go? Sorry. Yeah, how many cars per day are we looking at? Day trips? Thank you.
Yeah, It's probably in the traffic study here. I'm sure it's on one of the pages. It'd probably take me too long to find it to answer your question. Because I don't know that off the top of my head.
I mean, so we're already, I mean, obviously the piece with the light coming back saying that it's already a
Right. I mean, that,
is failing
to me, that-
intersection, the right term.
right.
Okay.
And there's two measures of efficiency that we've adopted as a city to measure the efficiency of operations, and one of them is failing today. The other one will fail 20 years out, even without the rezone. And so I think that the takeaway is, even without this rezoning, we've got a problem for further industrial uses of the site, regardless of this rezone. And so the signal's going to be needed to serve our industrial without a rezone. It's just, when is that going to happen? And I think that's why I was pointing out the 4% proportionate share. Well, they're only contributing, like he said, they're taking 3% of the acreage. Well, they're only contributing 4% of the traffic that's otherwise going to be generated by our other industrial uses.
So that 5-acre parcel that we're looking at there, that's going to be in the corner, that's going to go from an M2 to an M1?
No, it would effectively be restricted to the M1 uses
Okay.
by a deed restriction if
Okay.
you approve it with the condition.
And I know Renata's here. Can you give us an example of what type of businesses would be classified that would fall in that category?
M1 or M2?
M1.
The main difference between M1 and M2 is whether they allow outside storage or not.
Okay.
You know, the M2 zone, that if you look in the code, they actually have the same uses listed as outright permitted, but there's a whole series of uses that could be allowed as M2 with conditional use permit. And those are the uses that we're actually eliminating with the deed restriction, those that would otherwise be allowed by a conditional use permit.
So with that, I know that this particular site's been a challenge with just interest and whatnot. So with it now being we're shrinking that down to 5 acres. Does that still make that a challenge in terms of what would be
Yeah, that's something I'll probably leave for the applicant to address, but they did address that for the record in showing us how they would develop one concept of how they could develop just a 5-acre tract with M1 type uses. And I think that's in your packet. There was a little drawing that said, here's how we could develop that particular area. And so that shows that in their mind, they're not lessening the value of their property by rezoning 7.6 acres and leaving 5 acres, because certainly they still want to use the other 5 acres.
Sure. Okay. Councilor Hyde, anything?
No, that was very comprehensive. Thank you for that.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah.
Council President Hill?
Thank you. Brian, so does ODOT still need to approve a light at Hazeldale and Sequoia?
I wish I could, with 100% confidence. No, they've with us amending the supplemental traffic study and including their recommendations in the erection of a signal, they are good. They've bought off on that. And so they've told the city now that, yes, under those conditions, erecting a signal will work fine. It's not going to harm our highway functionality, and it will certainly help the city's functionality at that location.
So it's a pretty high confidence
Right.
that we would get the light. Forgive me, you might not be the right person to ask. In the packet, you talked about 362K and SDCs. are the transportation portion of those usable on this light?
Well, it's in the transportation system plan, the SDC component, and others as part of the plan would be you'd be able to use a portion of those for the light. Yes, and I believe those
Yes,
and some
yes.
others as well.
If we amend the
If it is
plan and
part of
add the
plan.
signal, then we can.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the key, is having the signal incorporated into our transportation system plan.
Okay. So that's a separate Knight's amendment, right?
It's a
Right.
qualified, yes.
Right. Gotcha.
Qualified, yes.
So Brian, they're looking at one driveway for the industrial lot and one driveway for the apartment complex?
Not necessarily. What we've indicated is they have to meet the 200-foot spacing, or if they can't, we'll at least give them a driveway for each lot, or they could choose to share a common lot between their industrial and their apartment. We're not necessarily dictating how that would be done. We're just saying overall for that 12.6 acre area, there should not be more than 2 driveways.
Okay. And in the traffic study that DKS did, I was looking and wasn't quite finding, did they have particular concerns about the left turn traffic out of the complex and onto Sequoia?
No, they didn't address that as being a concern whatsoever.
Okay. I saw their numbers in there and the rough percentages they were using, but okay. On the railroad, are we requiring fencing along the railroad?
One of the early considerations, pre-app meeting, et cetera, was a thought of a sound attenuating wall. We have kind of one of those in Darcy Estates, just off downtown. It wouldn't work in this location because the trestle is so high above that your wall would be 20, 25, 30 feet tall. That's not practical. And so I'm quite confident that in the development process, a fence of some sort would be erected. It probably wouldn't be a sound attenuating wall, but there'd be a fence erected, and they've talked about fencing the entire property.
I was looking more for child safety
Yeah.
from the railroad, and like you mentioned, the surrounding industrial area. Okay. I think that's all the specifics I have.
Okay. Councilor Hensley, anything?
No, actually, I had a couple questions pop up, but they're already asked and answered the others, so
All right.
I'm good.
Councilor Parker, anything?
Good.
Okay. I think that answers, I guess that's the answers to our questions there, Brian. Thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
The review there. Appreciate it. Okay.
So now there's the public hearing portion.
Right. So I will open up the public hearing, and we'll open it up first up with the applicant. So you guys have 5 minutes to present to us.
Thanks for taking the time tonight to hear our proposal. Sounds like there's some good questions, some of them that I think we can answer. So the thought is maybe we'll give you just a real brief summary of who we are and what we've done, and then we can kind of go through some of those issues just on and give you some sense of what we're looking at by the reference pictures. The company is called IDM. We're a multifamily and industrial developer over the last 20 years. We're vertically integrated. We develop, build, hold, manage long-term everything that we do, including this project if it goes. We've never sold anything in the 20 years that we've been in business, so we would be a long-term owner-operator of the park that we build, both the industrial and the apartments. I think which may be easiest. I think it's just easier to, as they had mentioned, we have about 12 acres in total. the thought is about the first portion, the park here and Fred Meyer here for reference, would be the apartment portion, and then the smaller 5-acre parcel would be where we'd most likely do the light industrial. And the theory there would be about 160-ish units is the right size for us, the typical size that we build. It allows us to highly amenitize a space with the workout rooms and a pool and community rooms and all the amenities we like to put in these parks. So here's a conceptual layout. As it was kind of brought up before addressed, we have to have 200 feet of space in between each exit. So the thought originally would be that we would essentially have one entrance for the industrial, one major one for the park, or excuse me, for the project, and then a shared one that would be a fire ingress egress. All of our properties that we build are fully fenced, so including the gate. So you'd come in, we'd have the community room, a community area with the pool, and offices right up front with the gate. And the entire park and the entire property would be fenced. The theory with the rail here would be that we would essentially put first a fence up for security, keeping people safe in and out, and then try and buffer it as much as we could with typically we had a 10 to 15 foot landscape buffer. Then on top of that, we buffer both to the industrial park and to the rail with drive aisles and garage only units. Just try and block off as much of that from sound as possible, and then the drive aisle and then the units. Anywhere where there'd be units that would be close up, again, sorry, going back, then we'd also try and buffer it with our own lighter industrial with kind of a staged buffered approach. And then any areas where we think that noise still may be an issue with Pioneer Pump or somewhere else, we would look at triple pane windows, additional insulation, double wall construction. There's a number of ways to address those issues. So that, in sense, is kind of was the planning for the project and why we had kind of laid it out as we did, with as that was mentioned, the strange shape. Any questions on that?
Could you mention some of your projects in Oregon we might be familiar with?
Sure. We can actually do one better. We'll show you some pictures. We actually
Primarily in Vancouver.
So the majority of the projects that would be similar to what we'd be doing down here have been done in Vancouver. And they're typically built anywhere between 7 and 15 acres, anywhere between about 150 and 300 unit projects. And they all, again, have highly amenitized spaces, community rooms that are open to the public, business centers, workout rooms, pools, spas. They're a very high-end product. They're not geared towards a low-income or a transient population at any time. We're really build these for the mindset of a renter that has the option to buy if they would want, but makes a lifestyle choice to rent.
Do I have any questions on those?
I don't think so.
Thanks.
So as Aaron noted, our general population, because we build and manage, we build a higher quality product to begin with because we plan on dealing with the maintenance and upkeep of it for a long time. But from a management standpoint, we really strive to build a better community through, very strict application process and fostering a relationship with the residents so we don't get a lot of the move in and move outs. And we have a much higher income, generally a higher age, 36 to 38-year-old resident who stays 4+ years. And when we study the Canby market, your residents never move, and that's part of the blessing and the curse is people want to move in, but probably the dozen apartments I visited, some of them had 50 and 60 person waiting lists. And they said the average wait time to get a unit might be 1.5 years. And, just speaking with the managers, so where does this come into a crunch a lot? And they said, well, like divorces happen, and now the dad's got to move far away. He's got to drive and see the kids. Real tough. So we see that a lot. They end up in Woodburn, they end up way out, and it really takes away from the family time. And if you look at the percentage of workers that don't live in Canby, 80% of the people that work here don't live here. And a lot of those people, again, in conversations with the pharmacist that Fred Meyer we talked to and some other folks, they would love to live here if there was an option to live here, but they're on waiting lists or they're trying to find somewhere to live. So, you know, taking a community like this and you know, it was interesting during this meeting to hear about all the amenities of the city and the amazing festivals and all the reasons why it's great to live here. People want to live here, and we talked about people taking manufacturing jobs. I heard you say if the people want to graduate and stay here. There's also people living in the current apartment communities that would love to graduate their style of living into something with a pool or something that, as their kids get older, they would enjoy more, like the amenity room and some other features that we build in. So I think, you know, from a community standpoint and fitting, you know, luckily this parcel is ideally situated with the park and access to the retail and the legacy medical and everything else that's next to. And as pointed out, some really light use with Wilco and some of the other local neighbors. We have a similar project up in Vancouver that was built in a former quarry, right? Former quarry that shares, you know, literally a driveway with the same type of light industrial use, and it's probably, you know, probably one of our highest quality of life. I mean, it was built right to mitigate any neighborhood issues, and everything goes well there. So people love to live where they work, and they become really good residents and community builders and volunteers to volunteer programs. So, you know, why let them all drive home at night? Let's get them to stay here.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Question.
No,
Yes.
go ahead.
Question. So the folks that are working in the industrial park, would they be able to afford your
Yes.
units? Okay.
Yeah.
On the income that they make?
Yes.
Okay.
Specifically designed for that, to actually limit car trips. You know, the thought is that the apartment or a project like this could actually help spur more development of industrial and jobs for people that want to live and work close by.
Okay.
And the hope is, I mean, when you look at the market rate of what's here, they're saving money because the commute's not cheap. You know, if they're driving I-5 now, we looked at an average commute of about 17 miles. Not only is it taxing on the family because you got time away during the commute, but it costs money. It costs tires and maintenance and gas. So in some ways, if they can get the same type of value that is already out there and get it a mile from work, it actually saves them money.
We can deliver at this size range, and the efficiencies, we can deliver a product highly amenitized, far more so than anything else currently in Canby at essentially the same price point as Canby is currently paying for their 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms.
Is this time for questions, or are we going to
No,
let
we're still in the
Sorry.
presentation piece, so if we can let them finish that, then we'll.
I think
we
my-
can-
maybe
yeah,
the
let's
last
open up.
point, one of the things we recognized is this amount of units wasn't looking down the road and betting that we could fill it or there's going to be growth and it'll absorb this. I mean, building this is just taking a chunk out of the waiting lists that are out there now. So this is the right kind of size project to absorb some of the demand that's already here, if not, you know, a good portion of it, which I think, you know, makes it you know, even more viable and really the right size. So.
And just one last point to add to that, you know, it may seem a little bit of a strange request to ask to drop a apartment complex into an industrial zone. For the size of project that we want to do and the type of product that we would want to deliver, we did go out and look at elsewhere in the Canby market for what would be essentially an 18 to 22 unit per acre project at 150 units, or about 5 to 7 acres, and did not find any other available land. It's not as though there's other land available to do this and we're choosing to do it on this site. There isn't any other land close to this size that's readily available for multifamily development at this time.
I just have one question. You're Aaron Jones?
Yep.
Correct.
What is your name?
Jason Larson.
Okay, I just want to make sure for the record. Thanks.
I filled out a yellow card.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I only saw
Just introducing ourselves, sorry.
Mayor Hudson looks serious. You had to card in, so I did it.
Fair enough.
Joe doesn't want to face the wrath of Kim.
No, I don't. I'm trying to keep a good record. Thank you.
So we're open to questions. Any questions we'd happily field.
I have a question for you. On a project of this size, once you're able to turn the shovels, about how long does it take you to put up something like this?
Good question. We're probably looking at start to finish about 6 to 7 months to go through the planning design phase. And then once we put shovel in the dirt, we actually go pretty quickly. What we typically will do is build out our community center first with the pool. right at the front of the property. That's typically about a $1.2 to $1.5 million structure that goes up in about 90 days. We'll deliver the first phase of units with that. So it actually delivers pretty quickly, and then we move people in as we turn over new projects to about a new building and another 4 to 8 units every 3 weeks. So call it roughly 90 to 120 days for the first phase, and then every couple weeks we deliver another small chunk of units. Mm-hmm.
When you're looking at the new zoning piece for that 5 acres, what's the build-out plan for that?
So for the
5 acres, for the remaining 5 for the industrial park?
The plan is to retain it. As far as whether we would build it to spec, there weren't plans to build it to spec, but we will hold it and continue to market it and build and essentially build for a tenant.
Could you guys, so IDM currently owns the whole piece right now?
That's correct. We own the whole
Over
piece.
7 years. Yeah.
Okay. And then what is the monthly rent range? I know you said you're doing 1 to 3 bedroom. 1 to 3 bedroom units. So ranges will be consistent with existing market. So we'll essentially be, in the 800 to 900 for 1 bedrooms, and then in the 1175 to 1395 will be the bulk of our range for 2 and 3 bedroom units. Average square footages for 1 bedrooms range about 650 square feet to 750 square feet. 2 bedrooms are typically about 1,100 square feet, and 3 bedrooms with den are typically about 1,400 to 1,500 square feet.
So size-wise, is that comparable? I'm trying to get a vision of what else in Canby, Renata. Would it be like township apartments? How many units do they have, size-wise?
92.
They just have 92. Okay.
I was going to share this with you as part of my testimony, but here's a survey of all of the apartment developments in Canby, pictures and all of the details.
Thank you.
And Township is probably a good example. That's what we'd probably call the newest. It's been remodeled. It doesn't have the amenitized package that we would do, but it has been recently remodeled. There actually hasn't been a new apartment project built in, I believe, 12 years in Canby.
A little over
12 years.
Willamette Grove was the last one.
In the market that we're in, if it were to stay strong like it is, about how long would it take to pretty occupy?
To stabilize up to 95%?
Yeah.
We would lease as we go. And so essentially, we would inside of 2 years is a short answer for a fully stabilized, fully built product from day one of planning, design through completion.
Councilor Parker, did you have a question before I jump in with a couple more?
Yeah, I think you guys touched on it. My question is, if not here, then where? It's pretty clear when we had a meeting out at Shimatsu and we were talking to the employees there about how much they loved to work in Canby, and I asked them, where do you live? And they said Molalla and Oregon City and Woodburn and Aurora, and I said, well, why not here? And they said, we can't afford it. And I happen to know somebody that fits into one of the demographic categories you were talking about of having a household downsize and need to find accommodation, so I'm familiar with that as well. But where else is there property in Canby? And also, is there not political lift to try and cite multifamily?
The largest, we can provide you a map that shows the current available parcels that could build on. I believe off the cusp, the largest one is just under 3 acres.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Below that, it gets down to under an acre, and there's very few of those.
Yeah, and you could piece together a larger parcel, but you'd be demolishing multiple lots of homes to do it.
Hard to assemble from a development
There's some
perspective.
homes that are on the right zoned parcel. It's in one of the reports that you guys have in your package, but the trauma of assembling all those parcels and tearing out homes is never good for anybody. So.
Yeah, if we were having a hearing on that, this room would be a lot more filled. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Trying to think what other questions I have for you guys. So so I'm going to switch it over to just talking about the industrial side. So why the change from marketing the industrial piece then to going to this?
Well, we've marketed the industrial parcel as it sits for 7-9 years.
7+ years.
And just due to its odd shape and it's tucked behind the park, it just hasn't been a marketable piece.
So why not then move it from a heavy industrial downgrade it to other industrial options?
I think no matter what the zoning is, industrial M1 or 2 or the other options, the challenge remains is in the reports. It's hard to attract the workers. I mean, every tenant that our leasing team and or potential buyers have spoken with, there is this challenge of commuting here. If you are going to build something and have dozens, if not 100 employees, it makes it an additional challenge, an additional cost. So there's a little bit of a chicken before the egg challenge of having the right workforce to build the right type of things within that zoning. So it's been a real challenge. I mean, we've had it marketed below the market value, and there's still no interest.
No, I get that, absolutely, because I know you guys did see the signs there for, and that was one of the pitches with that particular parcel and even some of the other ones being, again, we go back to, this vision of our industrial park, and you're right, an apartment complex was not part of that original thought for our industrial park. And that's something we'll talk about another time, I suppose. So I guess when I'm looking at that piece is, does changing the zoning help with the marketability piece?
Our thought is that minimizing the M1 zoning down to that 5-acre parcel will allow us to attract a smaller build-to-suit user that we've typically been chasing and not getting because of the odd parcel size.
Okay.
And there's a demand for the smaller format units.
There is, and I think in Canby specifically, I think when you look at, I think Brian Brown brought up developer Gordon Roots, who his idea, was what he initially brought up was all that light industrial space in hopes of doing a rezone change to be able to do hotel, restaurant, kind of a complex there. And I do think that there is a shortage of the M1, that light industrial piece in Canby. I know you guys have done your homework, but even here with the ones that we have, there's waiting lists for, as we've come out, I think even we'll say, recession and now post-recession, I think that number of people waiting for those types of size buildings and whatnot hasn't changed. In fact, it's probably, increased because of the economy change. So I do agree with that change there in an M1 standpoint.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
This might be staff too question, but what income level, I'm thinking about lower income families, what would they have to make per year approximately? Do you know that off the top of your head? What would they have to net in order to afford this?
Well, our application standard across all of our properties is 3 times your rent for gross.
Okay.
So you look at $800 unit, you'd have to gross. You guys can put my math skills on the spot. $2,400 a month. Okay. To meet that, and those rents, which are in the market now. If you look at the apartment grid, we're actually aligned with several of the other newer properties rent-wise, and that standard is pretty common. The government recommends your rent a mortgage about a third of your gross income, and that lines up with the income and the jobs that are out here now.
Okay. So say lower income families that can't afford this, maybe the idea is that they are vacating some of these other rentals. With that, I'm trying to think of what do we do for more affordable housing? How would this impact that? Does that make sense, Brian and Renata? Like maybe they'd leave Greenbrier or something, come move here, and then there's openings for lower.
I think you would see relief a little bit from the bottom as
others.
people graduate up. You know, someone who is in the higher income range, we're talking about the manufacturing jobs, pay $100,000 a year. Some of those folks that are in that 40 to 75 range that maybe are in some of these older properties now will choose to move up to a higher amenitized package with a pool and everything else, then freeing up those units for the people who might be younger or just getting started in their career. So, you know, I think it's going to provide additional options, and it's going to also provide new options for folks that are currently so deep on a list they have no options. So.
Just to add to that, I think, you know, we're building it as a market rate workforce housing component, but there's been plenty of projects in the past where we'll set aside 20, 30% of across all unit types and provide that at a 80 or 60% of median income price point.
Okay.
So, and we're open to that, obviously.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions for our applicants at all?
Oh, good, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Gentlemen,
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
No, yeah, stay tuned. I'm sure there might be some more activity coming your way. So we move into the proponent section. First up, I have Scott McCormick. How are you, Scott?
Good.
Good.
My name is Scott McCormack. I'm with Trend Business Center. We are a real estate development company. We own and lease out 2 industrial buildings in the Canby Pioneer Industrial Park. And next year we'll be constructing our 3rd building. Plus we have additional lands for some future buildings out there as well. And our buildings are really close to the site we're talking about tonight. In fact, if you take one of our buildings as the closest and measure from that to where the first apartment building would be going, we're the closest. So we're right there where we're talking about tonight. And we're for this application. We think it's a great idea for the apartments and providing another housing option for the workers in the park. Now, we did have some initial concerns early on when we first heard about it, but they were all satisfied. First of all, we were wondering about the quality of the apartments. Well, we went to the open house and were very impressed by the photos and plans they presented. Plus, we went up to Vancouver and drove through 2 of their existing apartment complexes in Vancouver and very impressed by the quality, and we'd be happy to have that as a next-door neighbor. So we're very happy with the quality that they're proposing. I would mention they talked about this, they did have fencing all the way around their properties in Vancouver and said they'd be doing that in Canby. We think that's a really good idea. Just another security buffer between industrial and residential. And the fencing was really nice. I mean, it fit in really nice with the landscaping, so it was actually a good feature. And we've known the developer for a long time, so we have a lot of confidence in him. He has a long track record of very successful, high-quality projects. So we're very comfortable with the developer who's stated his plans is to own it and manage it for the long term. We had some other concerns early on, but they were addressed in the staff report conditions for approval. The driveways we were talking about. We were a little worried there's going to be a lot of driveways. Well, there's a very good condition approval that's part of the staff report limiting the number of driveways. So we're very pleased to see that. We're very pleased, this is another big one for us, that we're very pleased that condition approval was the 5-acre zone remaining industrial and going to the M1 zone. Because that's a buffer between us and the apartments, a buffer between the apartments and all the other industrial lots as well. So we think that's very important. It was mentioned at the Plan Commission, which I went to, they got concerned at one point that this lot has rail access to it, that they were losing that. But there was testimony. There's another 60-acre lot in the park that can provide rail service if someone came along for that. In fact, that 60-acre lot is more on the outer edge of the park where I think a rail service industry should go. If you think about rail service industries, they're going to have a lot of storage area. It's going to be a little bit messy and unsightly. I wouldn't want that at the front of the park, right where everyone's driving in. So I was actually happy that that was being taken away as an option next door. We still have the 60-acre lot on the outside of the park that could provide rail services if industries came along and needed that. One final point is the written comments from Pioneer Pump that were in the Planning Commission reports. They were concerned about certain activities, certain industrial activities could be considered a nuisance to someone in apartments. So I have a recommendation on how you could address that. You could add one additional condition of approval that would read, the applicant shall record a deed restriction in favor of all the industrial zone lots in the Canby Pioneer Industrial Park, acknowledging the industrial uses on the industrial zone properties are pre-existing and do not constitute a nuisance, and the apartment owners and residents waive any future claims for nuisance arising out of the current or future industrial uses of those properties. So it just documents it, and it kind of protects us industrial users, and I've talked to the applicant, they would already have that in their lease anyway, so it kind of addresses that concern from Pioneer to Pump. But overall, I'd be happy to have this as a neighbor, and I'm in favor of the application. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Next up is Bill McCormack.
Thank you. I'm Bill McCormack. I just wanted to emphasize a couple of points. They've been touched on, but I'd just like to emphasize them a little bit. I'm with McCormack Properties, and we own the Trend Business Center, which Scott has described to you. And just a little bit of background so you know where I'm kind of coming from. Since the 1980s, I've had two separate companies. One's a construction company and one's a development company. And my companies, we've built hundreds of industrial buildings. And in the last 10 years in Canby, we built the Kendall Floral Building. You guys know about all these buildings. The American Steel Building. We built the second building at the Pioneer Pump lot. We built the Hawksaw office building on Redwood. And we've built 3 buildings so far in the Trend Business Center. One is now owned by Pump Tech, that you probably see, and we have pads for 3 additional buildings at the Trend Business Center. There's hundreds of acres. I think I heard it. I didn't know exactly how much it was. I heard it tonight. 367 acres of raw industrial land in Canby. And the Planning Commission has mentioned, I think it was mentioned tonight by Brian, that's have at least 20 years of available industrial land. In my opinion, it's going to take a lot more than 20 years to build out this industrial land. But one way to help that is with this type of development. To be successful as an industrial park, you need more than just industrial buildings. And I know it was in your packet, the council packet of additional materials. It was this article here that was in last week's Wall Street Journal. And I'm sure you read it, or if you haven't, it would really be good for you to read it. And just to emphasize a couple points in there. The article's where everyone walks to work. And they talk about in some of these big industrial parks, they're actually removing the industrial buildings to provide for housing. Because as it says right here in the middle of this article, the opportunity to live near where you work is attractive to virtually everyone. I think we'd all agree with that, right? We'd like to live close to where we work. There's also another trend that's going on. I'm sure you're aware of this, but I want to just kind of mention it to you. It's kind of an interesting trend. And I'll describe it this way. Young adults stay in rentals longer than other generations have. These are both single adults and family adults. And there's some reasons for that. I think there are a lot of them economic, but that's for another discussion. The fact is they're staying longer in rental, basically in apartments. So Canby Pioneer Industrial Park, to move this development process along, it needs more of these. It needs housing. It needs shopping. And Fred Meyer's is great. It needs restaurants. There's some restaurants in there. Medical facilities across the street. Daycare. If we can get more of those things, the Canby Pioneer Industrial Park, I think, will develop a little bit faster. These workforce, middle-aged, quality apartments, I think that's exactly what Canby Pioneer Industrial Park needs. Brian said, and even the IDM people said, there's a great need for this. And by the way, although I don't have anything to do with this project other than being a neighbor, I do know about IDM. I've known him for a long time. Their main principal, Jeff Gordon, They're going to put millions of dollars on the line here. They're not going to do this if they don't think they can be successful. They're a very good developer, very capable developer. There's a lot of comments about, well, the railroad tracks can keep people from living there. I mean, they're not going to do this if they don't think they can do it. So one thing about it, it's been touched on briefly here, but IDM's apartments, and Scott mentioned we went and visited some of them, they have nice ornamental fences around them and controlled gates to go in and out of them. And I know Canby doesn't like to have gated communities. I don't really think this is a technical gated community, you know, because gated communities usually have big, high walls, and they're usually made out of concrete blocks.